All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, so let's start with this year's DVT session. And DVT is basically a revision of all the course or all the subjects which you have all done. So this medicine section we will be doing in the form of keywords and how to interpret these keywords in the form of a flow chart to arrive at a diagnosis and how to manage that case. So I will be taking the three sections, that is GIT, cardiovascular and general medicine. So my advice is ki do not try to write everything. Just focus on the screen. Just try to recall back your notes and try to make your answer on your own. So no need for writing simultaneously. So just be mindful in this session and try to see how the flowcharts work in medicine. This PPT's PDF will be provided to you, so do not worry. So starting with the first section, and the first section here is the GIT section. So the GIT section, let's start with the liver section. So in the liver section, we will start with the first symptom, that is jaundice. So let's start with the jaundice. A patient of jaundice is coming to you. So how will you approach a case of a jaundice? So the first step will be look at the urine color of the patient. Icterus is there. Look at the urine color. So if the urine color is normal, that means ki it is not dark, it is not high colored urine. So this is a normal color of the urine. So this will be a case of a unconjugated high bilirubin. Unconjugated high bilirubin. So the causes will be like you have to read the clinical history. If the clinical history gives you the information like this, hemoglobin is low, reticulocyte count is high. So that means the cause here will be in the option hemolytic anemia. So it will be a case of a hemolysis. Now, if a question says, the clinical case says that jaundice is more after the fasting condition. So if the jaundice occur more after the fasting, then it will be a case of Gilbert syndrome. Gilbert syndrome. That is very typical feature here. Now, the third one, if the childhood is being mentioned and patient is more sick, then it will be a case of a Crigler-Najjar syndrome type 1 or maybe type 2. Crigler-Najjar. So this is how to arrive at a conclusion. While the second scenario will be the urine color is dark. So urine is dark. That means it is a conjugated high bilirubin, which is responsible for the jaundice. And in that case, the next step will be look at the liver enzymes. So depending on the liver enzymes, so we can identify the clinical case. So depending on the liver enzymes, so liver enzymes will be normal. So if liver enzymes are normal and the further clinical information which is given to you is black liver. So this word is mentioned, or BSP test, that is a bromsulfonyl test, that there is no clearance even after 90 minutes. So these two will be the key word for you. Black liver and BSP test, there is no clearance. This will be a case of a Dubin-Johnson syndrome, DGS, Dubin-Johnson syndrome. Normal liver is there and BSP is showing a delayed clearance. Instead of in 90 minutes, it is getting cleared in say 120 minutes or 150 minutes. Delayed clearance will be seen in cases of a rotor syndrome. So mark the answer as rotor syndrome. So identify these keywords. Now the liver enzymes, they show you inflammatory enzymes are high. Inflammatory pattern is high. Inflammatory enzymes are high. So like SGOT or SGPT are high. So in that case, your diagnosis will be hepatitis. So hepatitis will be your diagnosis, and further, what will be the etiologies of hepatitis, that depend on the further information. The keywords in the clinical case, like viral serologies, will be given to you. So the viral serologies here will be positive. So you mark that as a case of a diagnosis, viral hepatitis, depending on the serologies, viral hepatitis. While if KF ring is mentioned, a very typical feature, neurological findings are given, like tremors are given to you, then it will be a case of a Wilson disease. Wilson disease. While if keywords like skin pigmentation is given to you, diabetes is given to you, and arthritis is given to you. So skin, diabetes, and arthritis. So it will be a case of a hemochromatosis. Hemochromatosis. Primary hemochromatosis. While recurrent hepatitis word is mentioned, so if it is a case of a recurrent hepatitis, that means we are dealing with, the meaning of the recurrent hepatitis is happening every year. So it will be a case of a autoimmune hepatitis. Autoimmune hepatitis. Alcohol intake, very simple, it is alcoholic liver disease, ALD. Alcoholic liver disease. While if the obesity is the word which is given to you in the clinical case for hepatitis word, then it is of course a case of a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So this is how you make the diagnosis for these hepatitis cases. While liver enzymes, if obstructive enzymes are high, obstructive enzymes like ALP or gamma GT, they are high. Patient is saying like pruritus, patient is telling you, or pale stools patient is telling you, that it means it is a obstructive jaundice. So the next step here will be the ultrasound. So you go for a ultrasound. So ultrasound, look for the common bile duct, and in the common bile duct, if it is not dilated, that means the pathology is intrahepatic. The pathology will be intrahepatic. So it will be a case, or then it can be a case of a primary biliary cirrhosis or primary sclerosing cholangitis. So go for the EMA antibody, very important antibody test that we will be doing. So if anti-mitochondrial antibody test is coming out to be positive, then it will be a case of a positive, it is primary biliary cirrhosis. If it is negative, then it is primary sclerosing cholangitis. Primary sclerosing cholangitis. While if the bile duct is dilated, then we will think of some CA pancreas or some extrahepatic obstructions which has led to the common bile duct being dilated. So in that case, we will go for a CT scan or MRCP. So that will rule out the surgical causes in that condition. So this is a important flow chart of the the liver enzymes if they are elevated, and how to approach these clinical cases. Now, coming to in the liver, you might be asked some scoring systems, and they might ask you which parameter you used and which parameter is not used, and where these scoring systems are used. So the scoring system for a case of hepatitis or liver diseases, First is a MELD score, and this is a very frequently asked question. The modify, this is a model for end-stage liver disease. Very frequently asked question. So the MELD score, the parameter which are used are bilirubin, INR, and creatinine values. So these are the three parameters used. And how to remember these parameters? Just remember the common parameters are bilirubin and INR. Bilirubin and INR are the parameter which are common used in every scoring. Here creatinine is a different marker. And where it is used for a liver transplant indication. Why? The next one is a child Pukes score, and in the child Pukes score, we will take bilirubin and prothrombin time. These are the common markers, bilirubin and prothrombin time. And along with that, we take serum albumin as well as the clinical complications like encephalopathy and ascites. While where it is used for a cirrhosis severity. So we look for the cirrhosis severity, like class C is a more severe condition where liver transplantation is indicated. While MADRS score is consisting of bilirubin and prothrombin time, bilirubin and PT. And where it is used for alcoholic liver disease severity, ALD severity, and as well as for indication for starting the steroid in our patients. NASA score is bilirubin as well as prothrombin time. Remember, these are the common markers, as well as the SGOT, which is indicated for the cirrhosis condition. So where it is used for the Wilson disease. So these are the important scoring system which are frequently asked question for you. Now moving on to the complications of liver disease. So the complication of liver disease, ascites question, one question always asked in your exam. So how to approach a case of ascites? So in a case of ascites, the first step is always calculate a SAAG score. That is a serum ascitic albumin gradient. All of you know this is the most important parameter which is taken. If this score come out to be less than 1.1, that means either the serum albumin is low or ascitic albumin is high. So depending on the clinical case, if examiner says that it is a case of a symptom is a frothy urine, that is a keyword. So frothy urine means there is a protein in the urine. So it is due to low serum albumin, which happen in nephrotic syndrome. So it happens in nephrotic syndrome. Nephrotic. While night sweats is the keyword for a case of tuberculosis that is affecting the peritoneum, leading to the ascites, in which the peritoneal albumin is high. Weight loss will more suggest of cancer as well as tuberculosis also, but cancer will be the main diagnosis for a ascites case. Epigastric pain radiating to the back is suggestive of acute pancreatitis. So this is how to mark the answers depending on these keywords for SAAG. Now the second scenario will be when the SAAG is more than 1.1. So if the SAAG is more than 1.1, that means the high sinusoidal pressure is responsible for the ascites. So in that case, it could be a cirrhosis case or it could be a post-sinusoidal case. So in that, we will go for a ascitic total proteins. So the ascitic total proteins will be less than 2.5. Units are grams per deciliter. So if it is given that the ascitic total protein is less than 2.5 gram per deciliter and the feature of encephalopathy is given to you, spider nevi is given to you, that means ki our diagnosis here will be a case of a cirrhosis. So these are the liver failure markers, cirrhosis markers. Cirrhosis will be our answer. Now, if the ascitic total proteins are more than 2.5, if they are more than 2.5 grams per deciliter, Then if the keywords are given as it is a case of a myeloproliferative disorders. So myeloproliferative disorders, they lead to Budd-Chiari syndrome, hepatic vein thrombosis. So it will be a case of a hepatic vein thrombosis myeloproliferative disease. So Budd-Chiari syndrome will be our answer. Budd-Chiari. If azathioprine intake is given, so if it is a azathioprine intake which is given to you, that means it is a veno-occlusive disease. Veno-occlusive disease that affect the post-sinusoidal venues. Then if raised JVP is mentioned, so raised JVP will come from the cardiac causes which is leading to the ascites. So it could be a case of a heart failure, or it could be a constrictive pericarditis, CP, constrictive pericarditis. So this is how we will try to make the diagnosis of the ascites, to identify what exactly is the value of SAAG and what is the ascitic total proteins which are given. And depending on those keywords, we will try to make the answer of a disease. Now, the other complications of the liver failure. So first important complication is ascites. Now, before the other complication, let's see how the ascites should be managed. Sometime practical questions can come to you. So depending on the clinical sign, so whenever a patient of ascites is coming to you, look for the clinical sign of ascites. So if the clinical sign is absent, so that means there is no shifting dullness, there is no fluid film, the clinical sign is absent. So in that condition, what should we do? So if the clinical sign is absent, then there is only salt restriction which should be done. No diuretic use is indicated here. Salt restriction is only which is needed. While clinical signs is present, then your next step will be look for the respiratory distress. If the respiratory distress in the patient is positive or negative, so if the respiratory distress is not there, so in that condition you will start the patient on diuretics. So the next step will be diuretic therapy. So diuretic here, spironolactone is the diuretic which is commonly used, spironolactone. And indeed, this type of the question have come recently in the INICT exams also, spironolactone and furosemide is given. While if the respiratory distress is present, so in that scenario, there is only one option which is left, and that is we will go for a large volume paracentesis. 5 to 6 liters of the fluid is removed. Along with that, we give intravenous albumin. So to prevent the leakage into the peritoneum after a large volume paracentesis. And the dose of the IV albumin is 6 to 8 grams per liter of fluid removed. So this is a simplified approach of a patient coming to you with ascites. So how to go about it? Now, the other complications are, so if the question says the earliest symptom is in the patient is altered sleep cycle. So altered sleep cycle, that is the earliest symptom. While the earliest sign is dysgraphia, and most specific sign is given to you as flapping tremors or asterixis. So these are the clinical information is given to you, and you did the EEG of this patient, and in the EEG you find this type of the pattern, and in which EEG finding there are triphasic waves, 3 phases the wave is coming. So this is a very specific EEG finding, triphasic EEG waves. Or patient, if it is in coma, so might give you a delta wave. So this is a delta wave. So this information is sufficient. This information is sufficient for us to make a diagnosis of the hepatic encephalopathy. So our diagnosis here is nothing but a case of we diagnose the patient as hepatic encephalopathy. Now the treatment of the hepatic encephalopathy, the main culprit is this ammonia. So we can do the ammonia excretion into the urine by giving sodium benzoate. Sodium benzoate we will give. Uh, Ammonia convert into the urea we can do by stimulating the urea cycle by giving the zinc cofactor as well as L-ornithine, L-aspartate, that is a substrate, aspartate. So ammonia will be converted into the urea. While proteolytic bacterial inhibition we can do by giving antibiotic like rifaximin can be given, or acarbose can be given. Acarbose can be given. So acarbose, what it does, it increases the carbohydrate in the gut lumen, and saccharolytic carbohydrate consuming bacteria increase, and they will inhibit the proteolytic bacteria. So the ammonia production will be reduced. So this is the way how the ammonia is taken care of in the management of hepatic encephalopathy. Now, the other complications of the cirrhosis or liver failure, patient present with a fever, and a patient has abdominal distension. So fever is present, abdominal distension is present on the background of cirrhosis. And when you did the clinical examination, rebound tenderness was absent. That means the peritoneal inflammation was less. Peritoneal inflammation was less. With these features, we will try to make a clinical diagnosis of some complication of the cirrhosis in which the peritoneal inflammation is so less that rebound tenderness is absent. And when we did the ascitic fluid analysis, so in that SAAG comes out to be more than 1.1, neutrophil was more than 250, and proteins were less. So the most important hallmark of this finding is neutrophils are high despite the fact that proteins levels are low. So we will make a diagnosis of, yes, we will make a diagnosis of spontaneous bacterial peritonitis. SBP will be our answer. Important complication. Now, what is the drug of choice for SBP? The drug of choice for SBP is cephalosporin cefotaxime is given here. Cefotaxime is the drug of choice. Now, come to the next complication. Next complication is ascites is given with along with the cirrhosis, and renal failure is given, pre-renal. Indeed, this was the question which have come in the recently concluded exam. Patient of ascites, alcoholic liver disease, renal failure was there. So what will you do in the treatment? So that was the type of the question. So let's see what is the diagnosis here. So the absence of hypovolemia, shock, and use of nephrotoxic drugs. So these were absent. These were not there, and still patient has renal failure. Yes, our diagnosis here will be, it is a case of a hepatorenal syndrome, HRS. What is the drug of choice? The drug of choice here is a vasoconstrictor drug, terlipressin plus albumin. This is the drug that we will give for the management of a case of a hepatorenal syndrome. And in the recently concluded exam, what was the option? Options were, say, like furosemide, spironolactone, and they have given octreotide with albumin. So that is also true, but the drug of choice here will be terlipressin with albumin. But if it is not given in the option, then octreotide can also be given. The treatment of choice is nothing but a liver transplantation. LT is the treatment of choice here. While the cirrhosis word is mentioned, the third complication, let's come to the third complication. Patient has platypnea. So platypnea means a patient has more breathlessness in a standing position and improve in a lying down position. So cirrhosis with platypnea. So this investigation was done in which the oxygen saturation dropped in a standing position. So that is known as orthodeoxia. So orthodeoxia is standing position, oxygen saturation drop down. So this will be a case of, we diagnose this case as a case of a hepatopulmonary syndrome, HPS. Hepatopulmonary syndrome will be the answer here. And what is the treatment of choice? Treatment of choice here is liver transplantation. LT will be the treatment of choice here. Now, so these are the complications of the liver diseases. Now moving on to the intestinal section. So in the intestinal section, the questions are coming on the diarrhea. So the diarrhea we can divide as into two broad groups: acute diarrhea and chronic diarrhea. So the acute diarrhea can be non-infectious diarrhea, non-infectious diarrhea. So non-infectious diarrhea is usually due to drug intake, and drugs are antibiotics mostly. Pesticide, it is organophosphorus. Yes, pesticide organophosphorus. Mimics cholera-like illness, it will be arsenic. Arsenic. Why? It can be a infectious diarrhea. Acute diarrhea can be infectious. So in the infectious diarrhea, you have to identify the types of the infection, whether it is a invasive organism or a toxic producing organism. So if fever and dysentery, they are absent, fever and dysentery are absent, that means it is most likely a case of a toxin induced diarrhea. And history of milk sweets intake is given. Indeed, this is a neat 2021 question also. Milk sweets like pastries, patient develop the diarrhea. So this is most likely because of Staph aureus. Fried rice is Bacillus cereus. Rice watery stool is because of Vibrio cholera. Rice watery stool, Vibrio cholera. And the most common cause of a traveler's diarrhea is still the organism is enterotoxic E. coli. Enterotoxic E. coli is the answer. So you have to diagnose or you have to identify a keyword in the clinical case. While fever or dysentery is positive, fever is there, dysentery is there, fever means more than 101. Blood in the stool is there. So pea soup diarrhea. So the pea soup diarrhea will be a case of salmonella. So it is salmonella. Guillain-Barré syndrome. Guillain-Barré syndrome will be caused by Campylobacter jejuni. Campylobacter will be the answer here. Pseudoappendicitis is a feature of Yersinia. Feature of Yersinia. Hemolytic uremic syndrome. Hemolytic uremic syndrome is by Shigella. Is by Shigella, the organism. Indeed, the most common enteric source of the reactive arthritis is Shigella, and most common cause of HUS in India is Shigella. Liver abscess, this is easy. This is Entamoeba histolytica. Entamoeba histolytica. So these are the keywords for identifying the organism. Now, it can be a chronic diarrhea, and in the chronic diarrhea, if fever and blood in the stools are present, fever and blood in the stools are present, then it is a case of inflammatory bowel disease, IBD positive. While if it is negative, then it will be a non-inflammatory diarrhea, and the non-inflammatory diarrhea causes are stool osmotic gap less than 50 is given to you. So if the stool osmotic gap is less than 50, identify this keyword in the clinical case. So this will be a case of a secretory diarrhea. Secretory diarrhea like hormone related VIPoma, gastrinoma, carcinoid syndrome, all these cause secretory diarrhea. While the stool osmotic gap is more than 150, then it will be a case of a osmotic diarrhea. Osmotic diarrhea. So osmotic diarrhea like lactulose intolerance, milk intolerance, lactulose will be the causes. So look for this very important investigation, stool osmotic gap. While if a stool fat is more than 7% is given, that means it is a case of steatorrhea. That means due to malabsorption syndrome. So it is because of the malabsorption syndrome that you will be getting a case of steatorrhea, malabsorption. While diabetes mellitus and hyperthyroidism is given to you, so this is a dysmotility type of diarrhea. Dysmotility type of diarrhea. So this is how to make the diagnosis of different types of diarrheas. Now, inflammatory bowel disease, and as we discussed in the class that it is a last moment revision topic, usually one question is there in your exam for IBD, both ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So the features of ulcerative colitis, very typical feature, appendicectomy and smoking is preventive. While the main symptom, the keyword which you have to identify in the clinical case is this symptom is the keyword tenesmus. That is due to rectal inflammation. Megacolon more suggests the ulcerative colitis. Pseudo polyps in the biopsy goes in favor of ulcerative colitis along with the crypt abscess. So the diagnosis is ulcerative colitis, UC. So in UC, the treatment will be asked. These days, the questions are less on the management, but still you should have a superficial view of the management of inflammatory bowel disease. Like if it is a mild to moderate, then ASA is the mainstay of treatment. While if it is a severe case, then we give steroids and the antibodies, TNF alpha antibodies. While the second common inflammatory bowel disease is Crohn's disease, in which oral contraceptives, smoking, appendicectomy, they all increase the risk of Crohn's disease. While the keyword in the clinical question is fistula formation. So this is the keyword for Crohn's disease. Stenosis will be there, perforation also will be there. So this is a case of a Crohn's disease, CD. So treatment, mild to moderate cases, steroid and methotrexate are the mainstay of treatment. In the acute management, remember ASA has no role for Crohn's disease. So give steroid and methotrexate for unresponsive cases. While for severe cases, we give steroids along with the antibodies, and if fistula is positive in the Crohn's disease, then add antibiotics. So antibiotics are given in any stage if fistula is positive. Fistula positive. Now, malabsorption syndrome. So the second important topic after the diarrhea in GIT is the malabsorption, and steatorrhea is invariably positive in all the cases. So the steatorrhea, the next step will be steatorrhea is positive. Steatorrhea is positive in cases of the small intestinal disease like proximal small intestine, distal small intestine. It is positive in chronic pancreatitis. It is positive in bacterial overgrowth syndrome, or it could be because of bile duct obstruction. Bile duct obstruction also. So all these cause the steatorrhea. So we have to identify from these important conditions what exactly is the cause of a malabsorption or a steatorrhea positivity. So we go for a D-xylose test, and D-xylose test is abnormal in cases of, this is abnormal in cases of a proximal small intestinal disease as well as bacterial overgrowth syndrome. So these will be the two conditions where D-xylose will be abnormal in terms of malabsorption. So what we do, and if it is normal means it is purely a distal small intestinal disease. So in both the condition, we will go for a Schilling test. And where will be the Schilling test abnormal comes? So Schilling test will be abnormal in cases of distal small intestine. It is bacterial overgrowth syndrome and chronic pancreatitis. Chronic pancreatitis. It will be abnormal in these scenarios. So Out of this, if the D-xylose test is abnormal, Schilling test is also abnormal. That means it will be a condition which is affecting both the proximal small intestine as well as the distal small intestine, and that is a case of a Whipple disease, as well as bacterial overgrowth syndrome comes in both the abnormalities. So both D-xylose as well as the Schilling test abnormal bacterial overgrowth. While if D-xylose is abnormal and Schilling test is normal, that means it is a case of only the proximal small intestinal disease like celiac flu. Celiac flu is a proximal small intestinal disease, proximal disease. While if D-xylose is normal but Schilling test is coming out to be abnormal, so that means it is a case of a distal disease, and distal disease is tropical flu. So this is a distal disease, as well as chronic pancreatitis, which produces a abnormal Schilling test. Abnormal Schilling test. While if both the tests are normal, then it is a bile duct obstruction, because bile duct obstruction will not cause a abnormal D-xylose, will not cause a abnormal Schilling test. So in a clinical case, if steatorrhea is positive, think of these 5 conditions and then make a flow chart in the rough and try to identify those investigation results given in your clinical case. So this is how to make a diagnosis of a malabsorption. Now, so this was the section of the GIT and liver. So moving on to the topic of cardiovascular system, and in the cardiovascular system, last year at least 4 or 5 questions come on the ischemic heart disease. So this is a very, very important topic. So patient is coming to you with anginal pain, ECG should be done, and ECG will show you either a ST depression or a ST elevation. So ST depression, go for troponin test, and depending on the troponin, if troponin is normal, unstable angina, troponin is elevated, then it will be a case of non-ST elevation MI. While if troponin levels are normal in ST elevation condition, so this is a case of a presmetal angina, and if troponin levels are elevated, this is a ST elevation MI. ST elevation MI. So this is a very, very simple flow chart, and but very useful for your exams to make a identification of the diagnosis of coronary syndromes or anginal pain diagnosis. So because the treatment depend on what exactly is the diagnosis. So if it is a case of unstable angina or non-escalation MI, indeed 2 questions came last year on this topic, especially the treatment of unstable angina and non-ST elevation MI. So we gave 4 agents simultaneously: dual antiplatelets, antithrombotic agents like a low molecular weight heparin is given, beta blocker, metoprolol, or any other carvedilol can be given. Nitrate, yes, sublingual nitrate, or maybe the intravenous nitroglycerin can be given. So it is a conservative treatment. So mainly it is a conservative management. So what is the indication of doing a PCI procedure? So the indication of PCI, it will be PCI should be done immediately. Immediate means within 2 hours of these complications. So if a patient has a refractory angina, patient has signs and symptoms of the heart failure, mitral regurgitation develops, hemodynamic instability is there, like systolic BP is less than 90, patient has recurrent angina or ischemia at rest. So in these conditions, or patient has developed some ventricular arrhythmias, then go for an immediate PCI. And out of these, the most important that you should be knowing is the heart failure development. Patient is hemodynamically unstable and sustained VTAC or ventricle fibrillation. These are the 3 important for indication for immediate PCI. While the indications of early PCI means within 24 hours. So if there is a rising troponin or a new ST depression is there, then we will go for a early PCI, while we will go for a delayed PCI. Delayed PCI. So delayed PCI is 25 to 72 hours. So the indication will be diabetes mellitus patient, like we conservatively manage the patient, and we will shift the patient for PCI after maybe 3 days. So diabetes, renal insufficiency, ejection fraction is less than 40%, PCI less than 6 months prior. So this is a frequently asked question. Patient has got PCI done 6 months back. So what will be the management protocol and prior CABG procedure? So this indication of the PCI is important for your exams frequently asked question. Now, Prismatal angina. Prismatal angina is due to vasospasm. So go for a nitrate in the emergency. So nitrate is for emergency treatment. Emergency treatment. While maintenance treatment is done with calcium channel blocker. This is maintenance. Indeed, the drug of choice. If question comes DOC, it will be calcium channel blockers for the prismatal angina. If patient is not improving, we can go for a alpha blocker as well as the statins. So these should be given. Statin improve the endothelial functions. So therefore they are used. So contraindications will be aspirin and beta blocker, because these agents, aspirin and beta blocker, they precipitate the vasospasm. They precipitate the vasospasm. Now, the most important is the ST elevation MI. So the ST elevation MI, if patient present to the PCI center, so go for a PCI. Door to balloon time will be less than 90 minutes. That means the entry of the patient in the hospital to the angioplasty done, it will be less than 90 minutes. While patient is presenting in a non-PCI center, expected delay in the PCI is less than 120 minutes, then we shift the patient to a PCI center. If expected delay is more than 120 minutes, then we will do the thrombolysis there only. So this is the protocol, and this protocol is very important in managing a patient of ST elevation MI. The time period, ideal door to needle time is starting of the thrombolytic agent should be less than 30 minutes. So two important time periods for PCI, door to balloon time 90 minutes, and for thrombolysis less than 30 minutes. Now this is the blood supply of the heart. What are the arteries supplying which wall of the heart? So here you can see this left main coronary artery divide into a anterior descending. So this is the anterior wall here supplied by anterior descending, and this is the lateral wall, high lateral wall supplied by the circumflex artery. Posterior wall, again most of the cases is supplied by the circumflex artery. While the inferior wall, this is the inferior wall, it is supplied by the right coronary artery via PDA. So this is inferior wall. So this is anatomy based. What are the wall of the heart supplied by which arteries? And you might get a question of ECG leads. These leads shows ST elevation. So which wall MI is there and which is the culprit vessel? So if you see in this diagram, so in this diagram, the ST elevation is seen in lead 1 and AVL. These are the lateral wall leads, as well as from V2 to V6. So it is a case of ST elevation 1 and AVL from V1 to V6. So this is anterolateral wall MI. Anterior wall is affected, lateral wall is affected. So most likely it will be a left main coronary thrombus, which is supplying both the anterior and lateral wall. The next one, a very popular ECG. In this ECG, you can see the lead 2, 3 and AVF. These are the inferior walls. Inferior wall is showing the ST elevation. So this is an inferior wall MI. Inferior wall. As well as the R word is written in the chest leads. So that means these are the right sided leads, and in V4 you can see ST elevation is there. So right sided leads also shows the ST elevation. So it is an inferior wall MI plus right ventricle wall MI. because they are supplied by the same artery. So always be careful whenever inferior wall leads shows ST elevation, always try to identify whether the right sided leads are given or not, because the combination is there of right ventricle wall as well as inferior wall. Now, the blood pressure, the vascular disease, we go according to the 2020 guidelines, and according to that guidelines, these are the BP conditions like normal BP 130, diastolic less than 85, high normal BP 130 to 139, and 80 to 89. Most importantly, grade 1 and grade 2 hypertension is based on the systolic BP of 140 to 159 and diastolic BP of 90 to 99. Grade 2 is more than 160 and diastolic more than 100, and or any of these readings coming in that group. But how to manage a patient? How to manage a patient of blood pressure? A very commonly asked question. So lifestyle modification is the most important, and if patient is in grade 1 hypertension, so in that scenario, look at the clinical history, cardiovascular disease, CKD, diabetes, or heart associated or the hypertension mediated organ damage. HMD is hypertension mediated organ damage, which include LVH or albuminuria. So this is a hypertension mediated organ damage. If any of these condition is present, so if it is not any of these 4 condition is not present, so you continue with the lifestyle modification and add drug if BP is not controlled in 3 to 6 months. While if yes, then add the drugs straight away in grade 1. CVD, cardiovascular disease, CKD, diabetes, and hypertension mediated organ damage. While in grade 2, straight away start with the drugs. Now, what is the latest protocol for starting the drugs? So the latest protocol is you start with a low dose of A plus C. A plus C is ACE inhibitor or ARB plus calcium channel blockers. If BP is still not controlled, you increase it to maximum dose of A plus C. If it is not controlled, then add diuretic with A plus C. So this is an ideal, or you can say a optimum management of a patient of a hypertension. But still BP is not controlled. This will be known as resistant hypertension. This was the INICET exam question, the definition of the resistant hypertension. So if resistant hypertension is there, then we will add the 4th drug. 4th drug can be alpha blocker or maybe spironolactone we can add. So this is how to go about the treating a case of hypertension. Now come to the valvular heart diseases. So the valvular heart disease question also the question have come recently. So the most important is the type of the murmur and where is that murmur being auscultable. So in this diagram, if you can see, this is a aortic area. So in the aortic area, the examiner has put the stethoscope on the aortic area here. So you are able to hear a ejection systolic murmur. So that ejection systolic murmur will be a case of a aortic stenosis. So this is a aortic area. This is the second intercostal space. While in the second intercostal space, the blue color dot, this is a pulmonary area, and in the pulmonary area, ejection systolic murmur is pulmonary stenosis, and early diastolic murmur, which is also known as a Graham-Steele's murmur, is pulmonary regurgitation, PR. This is a mitral area. Mitral area is nothing but the apex. This purple color dot, this is a mitral area. Examiner has put the stethoscope here in the mid-clavicular line, just middle to mid-clavicular line, 5th intercostal space. Mid-diastolic murmur is MS and pansystolic murmur here is MR. Any mitral valve sound will be heard at the apex. While in the 4th diagram, examiner has put the stethoscope on the left lower parasternal area. So that is a mid-diastolic murmur. That is a case of a tricuspid stenosis. Pansystolic murmur is a tricuspid regurgitation. So this tricuspid area, tricuspid valve lesion will be auscultable. So according to the area, you have to identify which valvular defect is that particular defect. Now, coming to the cardiomyopathy. So in the cardiomyopathy section, if reduced ejection fraction is mentioned to you and dilatation of all the four chambers is given to you. So this is a case of a dilated cardiomyopathy straight away. So this is very easy to diagnose. A reduced ejection fraction like less than 40% is the ejection fraction. While if the clinical case says that there is a failure of the relaxation, the chamber size is not increased, but failure of relaxation is there. This is a case of a restrictive cardiomyopathy, RCMP. The chambers are not dilated, but you can see the wall is thickened. The wall is thickened, but chambers are not dilated here. While a classical case of a asymmetrical septal hypertrophy, the arrow you can see is a case of a HOCM. And for the last 2 years, HOCM questions are coming on a regular basis. So like a heart diagram is shown to you, the clinical feature of HOCM is shown to you. So these are the diagrams of different types of the cardiomyopathy. And there are some specific causes of the cardiomyopathies where you have to identify the diagnosis. So the specific type is, first clinical case, patient has chest pain, ST elevation is there, troponin levels are high, and apical ballooning is seen. So apical ballooning is seen along with the chest pain, and this mimics a case of myocardial infarction, mimics the myocardial infarction. So this is a Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, clear-cut diagnosis, Takotsubo or a stress cardiomyopathy. The treatment of the Takotsubo cardiomyopathy is usually alpha followed by beta blockers. Now, the second specific case is third trimester to fifth month postpartum is the time period. This is the keyword. If this keyword is not given, then do not make the diagnosis of this type of the cardiomyopathy. The third trimester and fifth month postpartum is given. This is a peripartum cardiomyopathy, which is because of the prolactin. And in the treatment, we gave bromocriptine here, bromocriptine as a treatment, because prolactin is implicated. The next one, in the V1, you will see after the QRS complex, a wave is there, or you can say a double slurring is there. So this double slurring is known as the epsilon wave, double slurring after the QRS. So this is highly characteristic of arrhythmogenic right ventricle dysplasia. So the diagnosis of ARVD will be made in this condition. As such, there is no specific treatment for this condition. While the fourth is ECG shows a low voltages, but echo shows a thick ventricle wall. So this is a specific case. Amyloid is a poor conductor of current, so ECG will have low voltage and echo will have thick ventricle walls. So this is a case of amyloidosis. So amyloidosis, depending on the cause, we will treat accordingly. So these are the four types of the important cardiomyopathy and how to make the clinical diagnosis. Now come to the next group of the disease. The next group of the disease I will take is the pericardial disease, and the clinical feature is a chest pain radiating to the trapezius. This is the keyword here, radiation to the trapezius. Pericardial rub is seen. So pericardial rub, and in the ECG, the findings which are given is a PR segment depression. So PR segment depression is there. This is the earliest sign of this condition, earliest ECG sign. While the ST elevation is concave upward. So concave upward ST elevation. So these two features are sufficient to make a diagnosis of the acute pericarditis. So our diagnosis here is acute pericarditis. So the drug of choice is NSAIDs. If a patient is not improving with the NSAIDs, then we can give colchicine. Next one, patient has acute dyspnea. Pulsus paradoxus is present in more than 90% of these cases. JVP absent Y descent is given. So that means that this information is sufficient to make a diagnosis of this medical emergency. Backstride is given to you like a raised JVP, low blood pressure, and soft heart sounds is given to you. So this is that X-ray. The cardiac size is high, but oligemic lung fields are there. And in the ECG, the QRS complex is alternatively changing. So this is electric alternance. Electric alternance is present. So with these, we can make a diagnosis of a tamponade condition, and the treatment of choice is urgent pericardiocentesis. So the diagnosis is tamponade. Now, patient has swelling. And very importantly, patient has prominent negative waves. When there is a prominent negative waves in the JVP and Kussmaul sign is positive. And most specific sign is a pericardial knock. This is a most specific sign. Most specific. So, and in the X-ray, we can see the pericardial layer is showing the calcification, calcified pericardial layers. So this is the ECG low voltage complexes. Low voltage complexes. So the diagnosis with these features, with these keywords comes out to be constrictive pericarditis, and the treatment of choice is pericardectomy, surgical removal of the pericardial layers. Now, the heart failure, this is according to the recent 2021 guidelines which came in September. So heart failure with the main important classification is now on the basis of the values like ejection fraction less than 40%. We call this as heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. If it is 40 to 49, then we'll call it as a mildly reduced ejection fraction. MR is mildly reduced. And when it is more than 50%, it is heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. So this is the classification of the heart failure, in which the treatment for heart failure with reduced ejection fraction is there are solid indications of those drugs to be given. They prevent the mortality. But the guidelines for mildly reduced and preserved ejection fraction are not so well developed. So most of the question you get from the heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. So according to the latest guideline, they have simplified 4 drugs are to be given as the first line drugs. So these are considered as the first line drugs, first line, to be started in a low dose, 2 to 3 weeks, gradually increase these doses. ACE inhibitor, ARNI inhibitor, and ARB like valsartan and sacubitril, beta blocker, MRA, or SGLT inhibitors. They are the first line agents. Add loop diuretics if fluid retention is there. Then we reassess the patient in approximately 3 to 6 months. So in 3 to 6 months, if ejection fraction remains low in spite of these agents, we will look for QRS duration. If QRS duration is less than 130 milliseconds in spite of maximum doses, we give the patient ICD device. So less than 130 milliseconds QRS duration, ICD device, they prevent the arrhythmias. Why? If the QRS duration is more than 130, then we do the pacing of the heart to make the both the ventricle contract at the same time. So this will be a device CRT. CRT is cardiac resynchronization therapy. CRT is cardiac resynchronization therapy. So this this is a simplified guidelines of heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. And most likely you will get a question on this guidelines. While acute heart failure, the acute heart failure guidelines are same. They have not changed. So in an acute heart failure, if lungs are congested, there is a edema in the lungs. So that means the patient will die of hypoxia. So lungs are wet. Oxygen is the first step. Oxygen will be the first step here. Why? look for the check for the extremities. Extremities means the forward blood flow which is going to perfuse the organs. So extremities can be cold or extremities can be warm. So it will take hardly 10 seconds to assess the patient with the stethoscope on the lungs and checking for the extremities. So if extremities are cold, look for the systolic BP. If systolic BP is less than 90, in that case you start the patient on norepinephrine. Norepinephrine. Remember, lungs are wet, so oxygen is the first in any scenario. Oxygen has to be given. While if the systolic BP is more than 90, then you give dobutamine. Dobutamine. While if extremities are warm, so that means there is the perfusion is well maintained. So in that case, we will add diuretics. Diuretics followed by vasodilators, followed by the vasodilators. While the use of the diuretic in cases of a systolic BP in norepinephrine and dobutamine, after norepinephrine, you add diuretics here. While more than 90, dobutamine and diuretics simultaneously we can give. But when the BP is less than 90, so norepinephrine first, followed by diuretics. While if it is dry lungs means ki pulmonary edema is not there, but extremities are cold. The diagnosis is usually a right ventricle failure. So in that case, we give IV fluids. We give IV fluids. While extremities are warm and lungs are dry, this is the target of treatment in acute heart failure. So this is the flow chart for managing a case of acute heart failure. Now, the cardiac arrhythmias. So this section, the most important questions they give you mainly on the tachyarrhythmia cases. So how to manage a case of a arrhythmia? So arrhythmia, look at if patient is in cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest means patient is unresponsive. Cardiac arrest means patient is unresponsive. So if answer is no, patient is stable, then if patient is stable, so cardiac arrest not present, patient is stable, then specific treatment should be done. Specific treatment. While if patient is not stable, look at whether it is a bradyarrhythmia or a tachyarrhythmia case. So patient is unstable, bradyarrhythmia case is there, immediately give atropine followed by pacemaker. Followed by pacemaker. While if patient is having a tachyarrhythmia, in that case, we straight away go for a DC shock. So DC shock will be applied here. If cardiac arrest is there, yes, we will go for a straight away CPR procedure. So look at the clinical scenario, how the patient is coming to you. So this is a simplified flow chart for your exams, and try to make this flow chart in the rough and look into the clinical information given. So this is a 2020 AHA guidelines on the CPR. All of you know, you have done in your classes. Like if the rhythm is shockable, yes, give the shock, DC shock, and shockable rhythm are ventricle fibrillation and ventricle tachycardias. While if rhythm is not shockable, like it is a asystole, flatline, or pulseless electrical activity, epinephrine is the drug to be given. So till these steps they will ask you, not the full flow chart they will be asking. Now, what is the specific treatment here? Like if in this previous the patient is stable, specific treatment will be given. Like a patient is a case of, this is the ECG. So this is a case of atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation. So in the atrial fibrillation, the rate control is done with the help of beta blockers. Beta blocker is given. Rate control. Rhythm control is done with the help of the either DC shock or ibutylite. The rhythm control. While the important question which are coming these days is in AF. What is the indication of giving the anticoagulation therapy? So anticoagulation should be given if there is a thrombus positive. Thrombus positive. in cases of valvular AF, even without thrombus, valvular AF, even if the thrombus is not present, and if a patient has non-valvular AF, but a Charts VAS score more than 2, then the anticoagulation will be given. So this is frequently asked question on the anticoagulant use: thrombus, valvular AF, non-valvular AF. So this is a atrial fibrillation. Now, if a patient comes to you with this type of the ECG in which P waves are absent, but the rhythm is regular, so this is a case of a PSVT. So in the PSVT, it is the carotid massage followed by adenosine if patient is not improving. Adenosine is given. VT, ventricular tachycardia. So ventricular tachycardia, in this case, if the mainstay of treatment is, if it is sustained or polymorphic, then DC shock. While if a drug is being asked, so it is amiodarone. While when the no definitive QRS complex is there, this is ventricular fibrillation. The treatment is DC shock. If DOC is asked, then again it is amiodarone should be given. So these are the commonly given ECGs, and first you have to make a diagnosis and see what should be the treatment to be done. Now come to the general medicine questions. So the general medicine questions are like on the shock, and last year they have asked many questions on the nutritional deficiencies. So let's see the shock, and of course the electrolyte imbalance. So in the shock, look at the JVP or CVP mentioned. If it is low, look at the peripheries. Peripheries are cold or warm. So if the JVP is low, peripheries are cold, it is a hypovolemic shock. IV fluids will be given. While if extremities are warm, with low JVP, it is a case of a septic shock. So that's how we can make a diagnosis. Septic shock is IV fluids, norepinephrine, antibiotics. While JVP is high, look at the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure. So pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, if it is high, it is a case of a cardiogenic shock. Cardiogenic shock increases the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure. So it is a cardiogenic shock. While if pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is low given to you, so that means there the blood is going less into the heart because of the compression. So if the blood is less going into the heart, obviously the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure will become low. So this is a compressive shock. Compressive shock means tamponade or pneumothorax. These are the two possibilities. How to know these two? With the help of auscultation. Heart sound reduced or breath sound reduced. Heart sound reduced, tamponade. Breath sound is reduced, it is pneumothorax. It will be pneumothorax. So what will be the next line of the treatment in tamponade? It is a pericardiocentesis that we have just done, and tension pneumothorax is the needle insertion in fifth intercostal space. So this is the summary of the various type of the shock, how to make a diagnosis. Now, sodium imbalance is very, very important. They are now asking more questions on the sodium imbalances. So how to approach? Look for the hydration, tongue and axilla. If hydration is poor, this is a hypovolemic hyponatremia. Hypovolemic. While if it is a case of adequate hydration, so hypovolemia means diarrhea, vomiting, cerebral salt wasting. While hydration is adequate, look for the edema. If edema is absent or edema is present, edema is absent, it is euvolemic SIADH is the answer. While edema is present, then it is a hypervolemic. So only two steps will give you a diagnosis. So hypervolemic will be CHF, cirrhosis and renal failure. These will be the etiologies of that particular type of the hyponatremia. Reason, in cases of the euvolemic and hypervolemic, the mainstay of the treatment here will be the water restriction, or that will improve the condition. While in cases of a hypovolemic, IV fluid should be given. IV fluid should be given. And how the IV fluid should be given? Sodium deficit. So the sodium deficit formula is a desired sodium concentration minus presentation sodium concentration into body water. This is a sodium deficit formula, and that is 0.6 into body weight for males and 0.5 into weight for females, body water. Now, for hypernatremia, look at the edema. If edema is present, that means patient has taken the sodium from outside. Exogenous sodium is more. And if edema is absent, so in that condition, look at the urine output. So what is the fundamental for hypernatremia? Hypernatremia occur when there is a free water loss from the body. So that free water loss can be from the kidneys or from extrarenal source. So look at the urine output. If urine output is more than 3 liter, obviously the water loss is from kidneys. So look for urine osmolality. Urine osmolality is less. Diabetes insipidus, urine osmolality is more. Diabetes mellitus, osmotic diarrhea, osmotic diuresis. If urine output is just 400 to 500 ml, so that means that there is a fluid loss from the skin or extrarenal source, and the kidneys are trying to conserve the water, so the urine output will be less. So it is an extrarenal water loss. That means from the skin, from sweating, a marathon runner, like that. So this is how to make the diagnosis of a hyponatremia. And the formula for free water deficit which will be given to the patient is sodium concentration minus 140 into body water divided by 140. Now the next one is hypokalemia, and in the hypokalemia the management is basically asked, not the causes. So the normal value is 3.5 to 5.5. Hyperkalemia. So if the hyperkalemia is 2.5 to 3.5, do the ECG. ECG is normal. Oral potassium replacement will be done, 50 to 100 milliequivalents per day. If ECG is abnormal or hypokalemia is severe, less than 2.5, then IV KCl will be given infusion wise. So that means ki hypokalemia, when it is less than 2.5, irrespective of the ECG changes, you give potassium chloride infusion. And this is the ECG of the hypokalemia, where you can see that ST segment depression is there, T inversion is there, and prominent U wave is present. So this defines the hypokalemic change in the ECG. Hyperkalemia, again, if the value is mildly increased, 5.5 to 6.5, so ECG will be done. ECG is normal, give oral potassium binders. If ECG is abnormal and hyperkalemia is more than 6.5, even without ECG changes, then calcium gluconate or calcium chloride will be given, followed by, so this is the first step that you will be doing to stabilize the membrane, followed by insulin plus glucose. How much of insulin? 10 unit of insulin in, and followed by 25% of 100 ml dextrose will be given. Beta agonist, sodium bicarb if acidosis is present, and dialysis will be the definitive treatment. And the changes in the ECG, will be, you can see in this ECG, P wave is absent, QRS is wide, ST segment is narrow, and tall T wave is there, tall T is present here. That defines the hyperkalemic change in the ECG. Now finally, the nutritional deficiency. Patient is have some predisposing factor. Patient is alcoholic, and patient is consuming lots of tea and coffee intake. So do not make it the diagnosis ki patient will have liver disease, or patient will have other conditions like iron malabsorption. So these are the predisposing factors. Alcohol intake, tea and coffee intake, they contain thymidase enzyme. So the deficiency will be of thiamine deficiency, B1 deficiency, predisposing factor might be given to you. Like the question asked in your NEET PG 2021 exams. So B1 deficiency, Wernicke's encephalopathy, neuropathy. Neuropathy is a dry beriberi, and high cardiac output failure is a wet beriberi, like pedal edema. Pedal edema is common in high cardiac output heart failure. Now, the next one, patient has these cheilosis and magenta tongue. These are the feature given to you. So this is a case of a riboflavin deficiency. Riboflavin deficiency. Now, patient has riboflavin deficiency or B6 deficiency or a tryptophan deficiency. They predispose to this vitamin deficiency. So other deficiencies predispose to the particular vitamin deficiency, in which patient has dermatitis in a very peculiar fashion, like a castle necklace. Yes, and this is a patient also complained of diarrhea and dementia. So B12 deficiency, B6 deficiency, and tryptophan deficiency leads to niacin deficiency, pellagra. While patient has microcytic RBCs, size is less, microcytes are there. Patient has neuropathy. Identify which deficiency I am talking about. Neuropathy is there, and patient has depression. Patient has depression here. So patient was taking INH in the clinical history. So patient has got microcytes, neuropathy, depression. So INH intake leads to a B6 deficiency, pyridoxine deficiency, and this is nothing but a case of a sideroblastic anemia. Sideroblastic anemia picture. While patient has this picture, the RBC size is increased, macrocytes and hyper segmented neutrophils are there, lobes. So patient is having a macrocytic anemia, and the clinical history, there is a deficiency of vegetables, fruits in the diet. Indeed, this was the question which came. So the deficiency of vegetable and fruits, that leads to folic acid deficiency. Folic acid deficiency. So always try to see the predisposing factors. While a patient is taking only fruits and vegetable, patient is a pure vegetarian diet. So pure vegetarian diet, patient has dementia. So in the one extreme, patient was not taking the fruits and vegetable. In the other, patient is taking only fruits and vegetable. So pure vegetarian diet, and patient has a degeneration of posterior column as well as the lateral column. So it is a subacute combined degeneration of the cord. So these features, dementia, subacute combined degeneration, vegetarian diet, is nothing but a B12 deficiency, mainly neurological features. Now, patient is a smoker. So smoking predisposed to this deficiency. Smoking, gum bleeding, curly hairs. So this is gum bleeding and curly hairs, coiled hairs. So this is a case of a vitamin C deficiency. Smoking predisposed. Smoking predisposed. Now this is very simple spot diagnosis. This is a Bitot spot. So Bitot spots means vitamin A deficiency. Now patient develop multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis. Patient has now this feature. This is simple. So patient has rickets, childhood, or osteomalacia. Multiple sclerosis is also predisposing factor, and that is vitamin D deficiency. Might be a potential question. Might be a potential question to you. So this was from my side, and we will discuss the some of the questions in a quiz section at the end of the day. So just go through these notes once again, and we'll meet once again. And from my side, it is the we'll finish here, and the next session will be by Dr. Srinath. He will be taking the beautiful section of nephrology and rheumatology. All right. Okay. And best of the luck for all your exams.